a promise that everything would be fine. Emily Sarah immediately took things into her hands. She sat down next to Sammy, slowly holding his hand, helping him regain control. Breathe deeply. There, like that. Sammy hung on to his instructions like a buoy in a jittery sea. At each contraction, she felt the pain, but she also felt the undefined support of Emily Sarah. Take a breath and push. Yes, that's right, you're great, Sammy. These words were a boom on her invisible pleasures. She didn't feel alone anymore. She finally had a guide, a presence, a light. And then the cry, a fragile, piercing sound, a cry of life. Sammy felt his heart beating. His baby was there. His daughter was there. When Emily Sarah gently placed the food on her chest, in that moment, everything else disappeared. The cold of the room, the pain, the anguish of loneliness. Everything was replaced by the warmth of an infinite love. She looked at the little creature, fragile, against her and knew that she had crossed through hell for that moment. Emily Sarah took care of her friend. She helped her to change and remove the wet clothes she was wearing. After a few minutes of contemplating her child, Miss Sarah put a light hand on her shoulder. Your baby is fine, but he has encountered some difficulties to come to the world. We will check these parameters in the resuscitation room. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Sammy slowly shook her head. She trusted this woman, who had held her hand when no one else had. She watched Miss Sarah write down the details of the birth on her consultation book, then take the baby with infinite caution. Rest. When you wake up, your daughter will be there. Sammy watched her move away in the corridor, impregnating in her memory this maternal and benevolent silhouette. Then, exhausted, filled with the distant sounds of the cries of the newborn, she finally fell asleep. The reprieve was short-lived. A burst of dry laughter and mockery woke her up in a trance. Voices rose in the corridor, voices she would have preferred never to hear again. The nurses, those who had abandoned her, those who had humiliated her, those who did not deserve to wear the uniform they were wearing with arrogance. One of them entered the room, the smile twisted by sarcasm. You finished screaming? We're here now. You can go to bed. Sammy felt the anger and impatience rising in her. How dare she treat her like a madwoman? She turned slightly, her voice trembling but resolved. I already have to go to bed, and the nurse want to take care of my child. A silent, heavy silence fell on the room. The two nurses exchanged a confused look, a mist of incomprehension crossing their faces. One of them ended up breaking the silence, a note of uncertainty in the voice. What a nurse! Sammy brushed her eyebrows. Miss Sarah. The nurses froze, their faces instantly decomposing. The atmosphere changed. Something indescribable was about to happen in the room, like an invisible and heavy presence. One of the nurses, with a strangled voice, hardly articulated, but it's not possible. Miss Sarah she died 2 days ago. She was interrupted by the precipitous steps of the other nurse, who was heading to the prenatal consultation book on the table. As she quickly shaking her fingers until she fell on the last notes of the birth. Her gaze was frozen. The writing, it was the writing of Miss Sarah. She put her finger on the signature at the bottom of the page, the fresh ink proving that she had just been bet. Her lips opened up, but no word came out. Impossible. Sammy's legs trembled. Her breath stopped. A screaming escaped her when she desperately sought an explanation. An outcome to this awakened nightmare. What's going on? What's going on? The walls of the hospital, silent witnesses, seemed to be closing around her. Where was her baby? If Miss Sarah was dead, then who had given birth to her? The horror spread like a powder train through the hospital. In a few minutes, the panic won over the entire staff. Security agents, alerted by the disappearance of the newborn, immediately triggered a fight in the entire establishment. The corridors were searched, the examination rooms turned over, every corner explored in a frenetic urgency. The surveillance cameras were past the fine-tuning, but nothing unusual, until a detail attracts their attention. In the corridor leading to the morgue, something strange appeared on the screen. Traces of blood of security guards followed the sinister marks, their breathing rotted by a mixture of fear and apprehension. The corridor seemed colder than usual. Each step sounded amplifying a growing feeling of oppression. Finally, they reached the morgue, where the steps guided them. Their steps stopped clear in front of the cell, where Mademoiselle Sarah was kept. The morgue, empty, was holding on at the entrance, the look haunted. Without a word, they designated a metal box, the one where the body of Mademoiselle Sarah rested. One of the agents, trembling hands, grabbed the handle and let the crate slide. What they discovered was frozen in their veins. Emily Sarah was stretched out, her face still, frozen in eternal tranquility, but on her chest, the lifeless body of Sammy's baby was. But he didn't have any. How did Sammy's baby end up in the morgue, lying on the body of this woman who had been dead for days? A nurse held a hand in her mouth, suffocating a cold cry. A security guard instinctively moved back. His throat was tied. One of the doctors tried to gather his courage and approached to examine the baby, but the baby was already dead. When we told Sammy that her baby had been found dead, she felt her soul tear. No, it's not possible. Her scream pierced the walls of the hospital, freezing all those who heard her. Tears filled her vision, her body trembling under the weight of horror. She tried to get up. The nurses, once so hard, were now frozen by fear. But it was not only the pain of Sammy that froze them. It was the inexplicable. Something had happened that night. Something that challenged human logic. The medical exams were formal. It was indeed Sammy's baby. No possible mistake. No confusion. But then, how did he end up in the morgue? On the torso of a dead woman for days. Doctors, hospital staff, even investigators were overwhelmed by this enigma. Nobody understood. Nobody wanted to understand. Because if we accepted this reality, then we had to accept the idea that a supernatural force had intervened that night. And this idea was freezing the blood. Rumors spread like a train of powder. Some murmured that Emily Sarah, in the water, had heard the cry of Sammy's distress, that her benevolent soul, refusing to see another mother suffer, had come back from the dead to accomplish a final mission. Others, on the contrary, whispered with fear that something inhuman had happened that night, that Sammy's pain had caused a presence beyond reason. One thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The story exploded in broad daylight. The media took over the story, and soon, all the gossip was about the hospital in Lagos Central. A baby was found dead in a morgue, a deceased nurse involved in a birth. The scandal was too big to be ignored. The families of the patients revolted. The human rights organizations were rising up. Faced with public pressure, the hospital was pursued in justice. A thorough investigation revealed years of negligence, mistreatment, and dubious practices. The administration was dismantled. The nurses responsible for the abandonment of Sammy were limoges, forbidden to exercise in life. The fear of the inexplicable was long-winded on the establishment. Some employees refused to work at night, whispering that they sometimes felt a presence in the corridors, that they heard footsteps, a distant voice whispering reassuring words, as if Emily Sarah was still there. For Sammy, the pain had become a silent companion. She didn't just lose her child that night. She had lost part of herself. The nights were long, too long. Every time she fell asleep, she relived this fateful night. She saw Emily Sarah smiling at her. She heard her reassuring murmur, and every time she woke up in a trance, her throat tied by a strange feeling of gratitude, fear, incomprehension, or perhaps a little fear. I hope this story has touched you as much as it has marked us. It reminds us of an essential truth. The role of the healers is not limited to healing bodies, but also to bring comfort, respect, and humanity. Today, we all have a role to play. If you are a healer, Remember that every patient you meet lives a unique and sometimes difficult moment. Your kindness can change everything. If you are patient or close to a patient, demand to be treated with dignity. No one deserves indifference or negligence in a moment of vulnerability. And if this story touched you, share it around you to remind that every life deserves to be welcomed with care and respect. Because in the end, a good caregiver does not only save lives, he honors them. So, let's all be actors of change. See you soon.